Michael Scott, stopped walking on the cold sidewalk, his heart thumping like a drum. He saw a lady on a park bench and at first, he thought she was just someone homeless trying to stay warm on a super cold December night. But then a street light flickered on and showed her face, and his tummy did a flip-flop. It was Caroline, a lady he had fired just 3 weeks ago, and she wasn't moving at all. It was super late, the kind of late when the streets of Seattle get really quiet and the cold feels like it's hugging you tight. Michael had just finished a fancy dinner, with yummy food and drinks, talking about making even more money. His driver texted saying he was stuck in traffic, so Michael decided to walk instead of waiting around. That's when he saw her on the bench. He almost kept walking because that's what grown-ups usually do when they see people sleeping outside. They keep going because if they stopped for everyone, they'd never get anywhere. And Michael had gotten very rich by not stopping for anyone. But something made him slow down. Maybe it was how she was curled up trying to keep warm. Maybe it was just a feeling he couldn't explain. Or maybe, just maybe, God wanted him to stop. He took a tiny step closer. The street light came on bright, and he saw her face clearly. His chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing it. It was Caroline, the lady who had worked in his big house for 2 whole years, always quiet and steady, until 3 weeks ago when he told her to leave because she was late. Now she was here, her lips a little blue, her skin looking pale, and her hands wrapped around something even while she was sleeping. Michael dropped down to his knees. "Caroline, can you hear me?" Nothing. No sound came from her. He very gently opened her frozen hands. Inside there was a stack of money, lots of small bills, and underneath some hospital papers. The papers said, "Patient, Ethan Smith. Age 12. Sickness, leukemia, which is a very serious blood sickness." And then it said, "Insurance terminated. 17 days without treatment." Then he found a letter, written by hand, that was never sent. It said, "I'm not asking for a free handout just for my job back. My brother is dying." Michael's hands started shaking like leaves. 3 weeks ago she had been late. She had accidentally broken something. He had told her to leave, never even asking why. Now she was here, holding all the money she had in the world, and it still wasn't enough to help her brother. He quickly took off his warm coat, wrapped it around her, and called 911 for help. As the ambulance sirens got louder, one thought kept buzzing in his head. She had been waiting for him, and he had never even bothered to look down and see her. Before we go on, press the like button, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're reading this from. Because sometimes God puts someone right in front of us, and we're too busy to see them until it's a moment we can't ignore. This was that moment for Michael. Michael's house was so fancy, it felt more like a museum than a cozy home where people lived. Everything had its perfect spot. The floors were super clean, you could almost eat off them. The kitchen counters were empty, except for a coffee maker he used every morning at exactly 7 o'clock. No messy stuff, no dirt, no warm, comfy feeling. Just the kind of perfect tidiness that happened because someone else cleaned up after him. That morning, Michael came downstairs in his fancy suit, his phone already in his hand, checking his emails even before his feet touched the bottom step. His helper had sent him numbers about his company's money. His brain was already busy doing math. He walked into the kitchen expecting his coffee to be ready. It wasn't. He frowned and looked at the clock. 7:03. Caroline? No answer. A minute later, the back door opened and Caroline came in. She looked super tired. Her coat was wet even though it was freezing outside. Her hands were shaking as she put down her bag. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying or hadn't slept for many, many days. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Scott," she said in a quiet voice. "The train was late. I tried my best to get here on time." You're late," Michael said, still not looking up from his phone. "That's not good enough." "I know. If I could just tell you why." "I don't need to hear why. Caroline, you're fired. Get your things and go." Her face became completely still. No tears. No arguing. She just stood there for a second, then nodded her head and turned towards the back room where she kept her jacket and shoes. Michael poured himself coffee and sat down at the kitchen counter. By the time she came back through with her bag over her shoulder, he had already moved on to reading his next email. She didn't say anything, just walked out the side door and closed it quietly behind her. The cleaning company sent someone new that afternoon. She talked too much and didn't know where anything went. But Michael didn't say anything. By the end of the week, he couldn't even remember what day Caroline had left. But Caroline remembered that morning very well. She had come straight from working all night, cleaning a different office building far away. She had worked from 11 at night until 6 in the morning, scrubbing floors in an empty building. She had barely made it to the train back home, her body screaming for sleep. But she couldn't lose this job too. Not with Ethan's hospital bills getting bigger and bigger. Not with the insurance company sending scary letters almost every day. She had tried so hard to keep herself together, but her hands were shaking, and her eyes felt blurry. When she reached for something on a high shelf, she swayed for just a second. That's when the fancy vase fell down and broke. Now, 3 weeks later, she had no job, no apartment to live in, and her brother had been without his important medicine for over 2 weeks. But Michael didn't know any of that. He never asked her why she was late. Michael sat in the hospital waiting room, under lights so bright they made his head hurt. His warm coat was gone, wrapped around Caroline somewhere in the back. His shirt was still wet from kneeling in the snow outside. People kept staring at him. A man in a super expensive suit sitting all alone at 2 o'clock in the morning, looking like his whole life had just fallen apart. He didn't care what they thought. He kept reading the hospital papers over and over again. Ethan Smith, 12 years old, leukemia. Treatment stopped. 17 days ago. A nurse walked past, and he heard a little bit of her talk with another helper. Hypothermia. Very severe, not enough food. She's been living outside for at least a week, maybe even longer. Michael's tummy felt sick. The other nurse talked in a quieter voice. There's a kid in our computers with the same last name. 12 years old. Has cancer. His treatment was stopped when his insurance was cut off. How long does he have without treatment? The first nurse asked. Days? Maybe a week. Michael stood up so fast that his chair scraped loudly across the floor. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and called the cancer treatment part of the hospital. This is Michael Scott. I need to talk to someone about a patient, Ethan Smith, 12 years old. Leukemia. His voice was tight and serious. I'm saying yes to whatever he needs. Full treatment. I don't care how much it costs. Start tonight. There was a quiet moment on the other end of the phone. Sir, that's almost $500,000. I know what it costs, Michael said firmly. Just do it. He sat back down, his chest feeling tight, and suddenly he wasn't in the hospital anymore. He was 23 years old again, standing in a different waiting room. His younger brother was in a bed down the hall, 14 years old, hooked up to machines. Same sickness, same desperate need for medicine that they couldn't pay for. Michael had just started his very first company. He was broke, he had used every single penny he had. And when the hospital said they needed more money, or they would have to stop his brother's treatment, he didn't have it. He remembered his brother asking him, "Are we going to be okay?" And Michael had lied. "Yeah, I'll figure it out." But he didn't figure it out in time. He built a huge, rich company after that. He told himself he would never be helpless again, never be too poor to save someone. And yet here he was super rich and he had fired the one person who needed him the most. A doctor showed up at the doorway. "Mr. Scott, she's awake. You can see her now." Michael stood up, his heart pounding, and wondered if Caroline would even want to look at him. Caroline's eyes opened slowly, like she was trying to fight her way back from somewhere far away. The room was warm. Too warm. There were beeping sounds, white walls, and the smell of clean medicine. She blinked, trying to remember where she was, and then panic hit her all at once. "Ethan, is he okay?" Michael's voice came from next to the bed. She turned her head and saw him sitting there, still in his wrinkly shirt, looking like he hadn't slept for days. "He's stable," Michael said. "His treatment started last night. The doctors say he's getting better." Caroline just stared at him. Tears started rolling down her face before she could stop them. Not happy tears, not grateful tears, but something closer to, "I can't believe this is happening" tears. "Why?" Her voice was just a tiny whisper. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have a good answer. "Why now?" Caroline said, her voice getting a little stronger. You had 3 weeks. I wrote you a letter. I waited outside your building for 3 nights. Where were you? Michael looked down at the floor. I didn't know. You didn't ask, she said. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. That morning, I was late because I had been up all night working another job to pay for Ethan's medicine. I hadn't slept in 2 days and you didn't ask. You just told me to leave. I know. No, you don't, Caroline said, sitting up a little, her voice shaking. Rich men like you don't know what it's like. I wasn't late because I slept too much. I was late because I was trying to keep my brother alive. And you threw me out like I was nothing important. Michael's jaw tightened. He pulled out his laptop computer and opened it on the edge of her bed. You're right, he said quietly. I didn't see you then, but I'm seeing now. And what I'm seeing is bigger than just you and Ethan. He turned the screen towards her. Rows and rows of numbers and words, names, reasons why money was not given, dollar amounts. This is my company's insurance system, he said. It's been saying no to people's claims for 3 years, specifically targeting families who don't have a lot of money. Over 18,000 people. Your case isn't the only one. It's happening a lot. Caroline stared at the screen. Her face changed from shock to something harder and colder. You're telling me Ethan almost died because your computer decided we weren't worth the money? Yes. Her hands squeezed into tight fists on the blanket. How many others? Michael scrolled down the screen. 43 claims were said no to yesterday alone. Caroline closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were filled with something Michael had never seen before. Not tears, not fear, but pure anger. You don't get to save my brother and then walk away feeling good about yourself, she said. You fix this. All of it. Every single person your computer system hurt. Fix it. I don't know how, Michael said. Then you learn. Her voice was sharp like broken glass in the room. You have money. You have power. You use it. Because if you don't, Ethan lives, and I spend the rest of my life knowing I was saved while thousands of others weren't. She looked him straight in the eyes. Can you live with that? Michael didn't go home that night or the next. He spent 2 whole days in his office, pulling out old papers, looking through records, tracing every time the company said no to money back to why it happened. The more he found, the sicker he felt in his stomach. It wasn't just a computer program doing things by itself. It was planned and done on purpose. The system would mark people based on where they lived, how much money they made, their past health problems. And once you were marked, every time you asked for money for health, it was looked at super closely until they found a reason to say no. Caroline's papers were there. He found them buried deep in the employee records. She had been marked 2 years ago when Ethan's sickness first went into the computer system. The computer program had marked her as high cost, risky because of someone else depending on her. And over the next 2 years, it had said she should be fired 6 different times. 6 times someone had said no to firing her, until the day the vase broke. Michael's hands were shaking as he kept digging for more information. Then he found the emails. They were from his money boss, Edmund Prescott, sent to the head of the insurance department. The subject line said, "Making money better for the last 3 months." Michael opened the first one. We need to give out 18% less money this quarter. Mark all employees with family members needing long-term care costing over $120 every year. Start firing people. The next email was even worse. Employee 4,738. Firing them will save about $128,000 every year on their family members' cancer treatment. Approve stopping their health money immediately after they leave. Employee 4,738 was Caroline. They had figured out Ethan's possible death as just a number in a list. Michael leaned back in his chair, his chest tight, staring at the screen. He felt like he was going to throw up. A knock on the door made him look up. Caroline stood there, still pale, wearing clothes someone from the hospital must have given her. She wasn't supposed to be out of the hospital yet. "What did you find?" she asked. Michael turned the screen towards her. She read the email slowly. Her face didn't change, but her hands started shaking. "They knew," she whispered. "They all knew." "It goes higher than him," Michael said. "The bosses of the company approved these plans 3 years ago. They've been paid extra money for every little bit of money they cut from claims." Caroline looked at him. And for the first time since she had woken up, something broke in her face. My brother almost died so they could get richer. Michael nodded. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "When are you going to talk to them?" "Tomorrow. An emergency meeting with the bosses." "Caroline, you don't have to come with me." "Yes, I do." Her voice was still and strong. "They tried to make me disappear. Tried to make Ethan disappear. I'm not letting them pretend we were just numbers on a piece of paper." She stepped closer, and Michael saw something in her eyes. He knew that look. It was the same look he had 20 years ago, standing over his brother's grave. "I'm not your happy ending story, Michael. I'm the moment you finally have to face everything you did wrong." The meeting room on the 38th floor was all shiny glass and metal. 12 bosses sat around the big table when Michael walked in with Caroline next to him. The room became totally quiet. Edmund Prescott, the money boss, stood up right away. "Michael, this is a private meeting for the bosses. Miss Smith has no business here." "Sit down, Edmund." Michael's voice was calm, but it sounded important. He plugged his laptop into the big screen at the front of the room. Numbers and names filled the wall. How many claims were said no to, how many different kinds of people were affected, how much extra money they made. "For 3 years, Michael said. Our insurance part of the company has been saying no to real claims to make their money numbers look better every 3 months. The woman standing next to me almost froze to death because of it. Her 12-year-old brother almost died." Board member Thompson leaned back in his chair. "Michael, insurance companies have to make tough choices. That's just how it is." "Her brother has leukemia," Michael cut him off. "He's 12 years old, and your system marked him as too expensive to keep alive." Prescott stood up again. "This is completely wrong. We followed normal ways of figuring out money risks." "You sent an email," Michael said, pulling it up on the big screen. "Employee 4738. You called her a high-cost, risky dependent. You figured out how much money the company would save if her brother died." The room became completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Caroline stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but every single person in that room heard her clearly. "My brother's name is Ethan. He's 12. He loves basketball. He wants to work with animals when he grows up." She paused for a moment. "Last week, he asked me if dying hurts because he couldn't breathe, and I couldn't afford his medicine." One of the board members looked down at the table, not meeting her eyes. Caroline kept going. "You see spreadsheets of numbers. I see Ethan asking me why I can't save him. Every one of those 18,000 times you said no to claims is someone's Ethan, someone's mother, someone's child." Her voice cracked a little bit, but she didn't stop. "If that's how you do business, then you're doing the wrong business." Thompson cleared his throat, trying to speak. "This is clearly about feelings. But we have people who own parts of the company to answer to. We can't just—" "I'm shutting down the computer program," Michael said. "Today. I'm giving back all the money for every claim that was wrongly denied from the past 3 years, and I'm giving this group of bosses a choice. Help me fix this or find another company to run." Prescott's face turned red with anger. "If you do this, we'll vote you out as the big boss. You'll lose everything." Michael looked at Caroline, then back at the bosses. "Then call the vote." 5 board members stood up and walked out of the room. 7 stayed. Prescott stared at Michael, his jaw tight. "You're going to be very sorry for this." "Maybe," Michael said quietly. "But at least I'll be able to sleep at night." The security guards walked Prescott out. As the door closed behind him, Caroline turned to Michael. "What happens now?" Michael looked at the bosses who stayed, then at the numbers still glowing on the screen. 18,000 names waiting for someone to fight for them. "Now," he said, "we tell everyone." 2 days later, Caroline's letter was everywhere. Someone at the hospital had given it to the news people. By morning, her face was on every news website. Her own handwriting. Her words. "I'm not asking for a free handout. Just for my job back. My brother is dying." Michael's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His team who handled public image were panicking. The board members who had stayed were now wondering if they made the right choice. But then another story came out. Former housekeeper uses rich boss's guilt for money. It was from someone who didn't say their name, and it was mean. It said Caroline had planned everything. That she had tricked Michael. That Ethan's sickness was made to sound worse than it was. That she was using a sick child to get rich. Michael found Caroline in the guest room of his house, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. Tears were streaming down her face. "They're going to ruin me," she whispered. Michael sat down beside her. "No, they're not. You don't understand." She looked at him and her voice broke. "I've spent my whole life being invisible, like no one sees me, and now I'm everywhere, and they're saying I'm a liar." "Then we tell the truth," Michael said. "Today a press conference. You and me." Caroline shook her head. "I can't. Look at me. I'm nobody. Who's going to believe me over them?" "I will." Michael's voice was steady. "And so will everyone who has ever been where you are right now." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded her head. The press conference was super full. Cameras everywhere. Reporters shouting questions even before they reached the stage. Michael spoke first, telling everyone everything: the computer program, the denied claims, the 18,000 people who were hurt. He announced that his company would give $500 million to help, that there would be independent people checking things, and a new group to help patients. Then he stepped aside. Caroline stood there, her hands shaking, staring at the wall of cameras. For a second, Michael thought she might walk away, but she didn't. "My name is Caroline Smith," she said, her voice quiet at first. "I'm 30 years old. I've cleaned houses since I was 18. I've raised my brother since I was 23. Her voice got stronger. "I worked 3 jobs to keep him alive. I lost my home trying to save him. And I slept on a park bench with everything I owned because I had already lost everything else." The room became completely still. "But I'm not here for people to feel sorry for me," Caroline said. "I'm here because there are millions of people like me. People who are invisible until they're dying. Ignored until they're gone." She looked directly into the cameras. "This company's system didn't see my brother's life. It saw a cost, and that has to end." Her voice cracked a little, but she kept going. "To everyone who has been told no, who has been told your family isn't worth saving, who has had to choose between medicine and food, I see you. We see you. And we're not stopping until this is fixed." Outside through the big windows, Michael could see a crowd of people gathering. People holding signs, pictures of loved ones, names of people they had lost. Caroline's words had found them, and they weren't going to let her stand alone. That night, Caroline didn't say much. Michael drove her to the hospital in silence. She stared out the window the whole way, her hands folded in her lap, her face hard to read. When they pulled up, she didn't move right away. "What if he's angry?" she said quietly. Michael looked at her. "Why would he be angry?" "Because I left him." Her voice broke. "I was so busy trying to save him that I wasn't there. He's been in that hospital room alone, and I was sleeping outside on a bench. You were fighting for his life, but he didn't know that." She wiped her eyes. "What if he thinks I left him alone?" Michael didn't have an answer for that. They walked through the hospital together. Caroline's steps got slower the closer they got to the kids' cancer floor. By the time they reached Ethan's room, she had stopped completely. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Michael said gently. Caroline took a deep breath, pushed the door open and stepped inside. Ethan was sitting up in bed, thinner than Michael expected, a special mask covering half his face, but his eyes lit up the second he saw her. "Caroline." She crossed the room in 3 big steps and wrapped her arms around him, being very careful not to mess up his medicine tubes. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak. "I thought something happened to you," Ethan said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "They wouldn't tell me where you were." "I'm okay," Caroline whispered. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Michael stayed by the door watching them. He felt like he was seeing something very special and private. After a while, Ethan looked over at him. "Who's that?" Caroline pulled back and wiped her face. "That's Michael. He's the one who made sure you got your treatment." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the one who fired her." Michael's chest tightened. "I am, but you helped me. Your sister helped you," Michael said. "I just finally learned to pay attention to people." Ethan looked between them, trying to understand. "Are you fixing it for the other kids too?" Michael nodded. "We're trying our best." "Good." Ethan leaned back against his pillows, tired, but more alive and happy than he had been in weeks. Because it's not fair. Kids shouldn't have to worry about stuff like this. Caroline kissed his forehead. No, they shouldn't. As they left the hospital later, Caroline was quiet again, but this time it was different. This time there was something like hope in her quietness. He looks stronger, Michael said. He is, Caroline said. She stopped walking and turned to face him. The doctors said he's getting better with the treatment. They think he's going to make it. Her voice cracked on the last word. Michael didn't say anything. He just stood there with her while she cried. Not from sadness this time, but from a relief so huge it almost hurt. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. What happens next? She asked. Michael thought about the 18,000 names still waiting. The government investigation that had just started, the lawsuits already being filed in court. Now, he said, we finish what we started. 2 months later, everything looked different. The government investigation was moving forward. Checks for money were going out to families who had been told no before. The computer program had been completely shut down, and Caroline's face was no longer on the news as a sad victim. Now she was something else entirely. Michael found her in what used to be an empty office on the 15th floor. Now it was full of phones, computers, and people. Most of them used to be sick patients or family members who had gone through the same tough things she had. How many calls today? He asked. 37 calls, Caroline said, looking up from her desk. 12 we were able to help right away. The rest we're still working on. She looked tired but different, stronger. Like she had found something important she didn't even know she was looking for. The bosses approved your new job title, Michael said. Director of Patient Advocacy. It's official. Caroline smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I never thought I'd have a job title. You've earned it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the doctor called this morning. Michael's heart stopped for a second, and Ethan's latest pictures of his insides came back clean. Her voice broke a little. He's in remission. Michael felt something big and heavy release in his chest. Something he didn't even know he had been holding on to. Caroline, that's... I know. She stood up, tears streaming down her face. I know. They stood there in that small office, and for the first time since that cold night on the bench, Caroline looked like she could finally breathe freely. He wants to meet you, she said. Really? Meet me. Not in a hospital room. The next day, Caroline brought Ethan to the office. He was thinner than other kids his age. His hair was still growing back in patches, but he was smiling. Really smiling. Michael met them in the lobby. Hi, Ethan said, holding out his hand. Michael shook it carefully. Hi, Ethan. It's good to see you. Ethan looked around at the big building, then back at Michael. My sister says you're trying to help other kids like me. We are. Can I help too? Michael glanced at Caroline, then back at Ethan. What do you have in mind? I want to tell people what it's like, Ethan said. Being sick, being scared. Maybe if they hear it from a kid, they'll understand why it matters. Caroline's hand went to her mouth, surprised. Michael knelt down to Ethan's level. I think that's exactly what people need to hear. That night, Michael sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. He was thinking about a boy who wanted to turn his pain into a way to help others. About a woman who refused to stay invisible. About how many lives could change if people just stopped long enough to really see each other. His phone buzzed. A message from Caroline. The big party for the charity is in 2 weeks. Ethan wants to speak. Are you ready for this? Michael stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back. Let's show them what it looks like when people become good again. The big ballroom was full of people. People who gave money, people who helped families, news reporters, people who had been helped by the charity, people who were still fighting for help. Michael stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. Caroline was beside him in a simple dress, looking more nervous than she had been at the press conference. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just thinking about how different everything is now. Good different. Yeah, she smiled. Good different. Then Ethan appeared, wearing a suit that was a little too big for him, his hair fully grown back now. No mask covering his face. I'm ready, he said. Caroline knelt down and straightened his collar. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I know, Ethan said. But I want people to understand. I want them to know it's not just about money. It's about being seen. The lights got dim. Someone called Ethan's name. He walked onto that stage like he had been doing it his whole life. My name is Ethan Smith, he said into the microphone. I'm 13 years old. 6 months ago, I was dying because a system decided I wasn't worth saving. The room became completely silent. But my sister didn't accept that. His voice was steady. She lost everything trying to save me. Her job, her home, almost her life. He paused. And when she woke up in that hospital, she didn't just save me. She decided to save everyone. People were crying. Michael could see it from the side of the stage. Ethan kept going. I'm standing here tonight because someone finally stopped. Someone finally looked. And I think that's what God does. He puts people in front of us when we're not paying attention. And he keeps putting them there until we finally see. Caroline was quietly crying next to Michael. Ethan finished simply. My sister taught me that being strong isn't about not breaking. It's about getting back up when you do. So, thank you for getting back up for all of us. The applause shook the entire room. Later, after the speeches and the pictures and the fancy drinks, Michael found Caroline on the rooftop balcony, looking out at the city. You good? He asked. She nodded. Just thinking about that bench, how close we came to everything going wrong. What stopped you from giving up? Ethan, she smiled softly. The day before I ended up there, he told me, you're the strongest person I know. You don't quit. So I didn't. Michael was quiet. I walk past that bench sometimes. I think about how different everything would be if I'd left the restaurant 5 minutes earlier or later. But you didn't, Caroline said, turning to face him. You were exactly on time. Maybe that's how grace works. Grace? Michael asked. It shows up in a coat you didn't expect. In the middle of the worst moment of your life. I don't feel like grace, Michael said. Grace never does, she said. It just shows up and does the work. They stood there watching the city lights twinkle. Somewhere below, families were getting checks they had been waiting for. Important treatments were being approved. Children were getting to dream again. Caroline's voice was soft. We weren't rescued, Michael. We were seen. And once you've been truly seen, you can never be invisible again. Michael thought about the man he had been 6 months ago. Walking past people, building his rich company, never looking down to see others, and he thought about the man he was now. Thank you, he said quietly. Caroline smiled. For what? For not giving up. For showing me what I had stopped seeing. She reached out and squeezed his hand once. We saved each other. And standing there above a city that had once ignored both of them, Michael understood something he had spent his whole life missing. Sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back.